What if I told you that one episode of The Boondocks exposed a disturbing truth about history itself? Not just Black history, but the way all history can be manipulated, distorted, and rewritten depending on who is telling the story. In this episode, one man is remembered as a fearless hero who risked everything to free the enslaved. Yet in another version of the exact same story, that very same man becomes a traitor who hunted his own people. So which version is true? And more importantly, who benefits when history is told one way instead of another? Through satire, humor, and surprisingly sharp social commentary, The Boondocks delivers a powerful lesson about narrative control, collective memory, and the dangerous power of the storyteller. This is the story of Catcher Freeman. The story begins in a familiar way. An elder sits down to tell the next generation about their past. Granddad gathers Riley and Huey and begins recounting the legend of a man named Catcher Freeman. According to him, Catcher Freeman was more than just an ancestor. He was a warrior, a liberator, and perhaps the greatest Black hero who ever lived. In Granddad's version of history, Catcher Freeman traveled from plantation to plantation, freeing enslaved people and striking fear into those who profited from human bondage. He is described almost like a folk hero, a larger-than-life figure whose courage and strength seem to grow with every retelling. But before Granddad can get very far into the story, Riley immediately challenges him. How does he know any of this is true? And that question changes everything. Because the episode is not really about Catcher Freeman. It is about the stories we choose to tell. Throughout history, communities have often created legendary versions of real people. Sometimes these stories preserve important truths. Sometimes they inspire pride, resilience, and hope. But over time, the line between history and mythology can become blurred. A real person becomes a symbol, and a symbol can become something larger than reality itself. Before we continue, I'm curious about your perspective. Do you think legendary historical figures are usually exaggerated over time, or do their stories deserve to be remembered exactly as they are told? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoy exploring hidden history, cultural analysis, and the deeper meaning behind stories like this one, consider subscribing to the channel. Now let's see who Catcher Freeman really was, or at least who people believed him to be. According to Granddad's version of the story, Catcher Freeman was not merely a legend. He was the embodiment of freedom itself. The tale takes us back to a southern plantation where enslaved men and women dreamed of escape while living under the harsh rule of Colonel Lynchwater. Among them was a young woman named Thelma, determined to find a life beyond bondage. One night, while attempting to flee, she encounters the mysterious Catcher Freeman. In Granddad's telling, Catcher appears almost like a mythical hero emerging from the shadows. Tall, fearless, and seemingly unstoppable, he promises to return with his brigade and liberate everyone on the plantation. As hope spreads among the enslaved workers, a rebellion begins to take shape. But every legend needs a villain. Jealous and resentful, Tobias betrays the plan, putting the entire mission at risk. Yet in true heroic fashion, Catcher overcomes the betrayal, defeats his enemies, and rides into history as a symbol of courage and resistance. At least, that's the version Granddad wants everyone to believe. But then, the story takes a dramatic turn. Just as Granddad finishes presenting Catcher Freeman as an unstoppable hero, another voice enters the conversation: Uncle Ruckus. And according to Ruckus, everything we've heard so far is a lie. In his version of history, Catcher Freeman was never a liberator. In fact, he claims Catcher Freeman was one of the most feared slave catchers in the South. Rather than helping enslaved people escape, he hunted them down and returned them to their owners. The heroic freedom fighter suddenly becomes the villain. And that's exactly what makes this episode so brilliant. Ruckus doesn't simply tell a different story. He completely reverses the moral framework of the original narrative. In his telling, plantation owners are portrayed as kind and generous. The enslaved people are depicted as lazy, ungrateful, and unwilling to work. Even Thelma is transformed from a courageous woman seeking freedom into a manipulative temptress. Every hero becomes a villain. Every victim becomes the problem. Every act of resistance becomes an act of betrayal. The absurdity is intentional. The Boondocks exaggerates Ruckus's version to expose how historical narratives can be twisted when viewed through the lens of prejudice and self-hatred. And while the story is played for laughs, the underlying message is surprisingly serious. History is often shaped by those who have the power to tell it. The same person can be remembered as a hero by one generation and a criminal by another. The same event can be celebrated, condemned, or completely rewritten, depending on who controls the narrative. What makes Ruckus particularly fascinating is that he represents a form of internalized racism. He accepts and repeats ideas that diminish his own community, defending systems that historically oppressed people who looked like him. Through satire, the episode challenges viewers to recognize how easily distorted stories can become accepted as truth. And now we find ourselves facing a difficult question. If Granddad's version sounds too heroic and Ruckus's version sounds too hateful, then where does the truth actually lie? As it turns out, the answer may be hidden somewhere between the two. This is where Huey changes the entire conversation. Unlike Granddad and Ruckus, Huey isn't interested in myths or personal biases. He wants evidence. And when he begins digging into the story, a third version of Catcher Freeman emerges. Not a flawless hero, not a ruthless villain, but something far more believable. According to Huey's research, Catcher Freeman was likely a complicated man caught between different worlds. He was reportedly the mixed-race son of a plantation owner, a status that placed him in a unique position within the brutal hierarchy of slavery. He could read and write, and more importantly, he dreamed of becoming a storyteller. In fact, he may have written what could be considered an early screenplay, long before the film industry even existed. But then came a choice. When a slave rebellion was being planned, Catcher initially betrayed the conspirators in exchange for the opportunity to sell his script. A selfish decision, a human decision. Yet in the chaos that followed, events spiraled out of control, and Catcher ultimately found himself fighting alongside the enslaved people he had once betrayed. And just like that, a legend was born. Not from perfection, but from contradiction. Before we move on, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Which version of Catcher Freeman do you find most believable? Granddad's hero, Ruckus's villain, or Huey's flawed human being? Leave your answer in the comments below. And if you're enjoying this exploration of history, storytelling, and hidden meanings in popular culture, don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives like this one. And that brings us to the real message of this episode. The story of Catcher Freeman was never really about Catcher Freeman. It was about who gets to tell history. Granddad transformed him into a legendary hero. Ruckus turned him into a symbol of the trail. Huey revealed a far more complicated reality. Together, these three versions expose a powerful truth. History is rarely a collection of simple facts. More often, it is a battle between competing narratives. The Boondocks uses comedy to explore something that has happened throughout history. Historical figures are often reshaped to fit the needs of later generations. Some are elevated into flawless heroes. Others are reduced to villains. And in both cases, the messy reality of who they truly were can disappear. That is why this episode remains so relevant today. Whether we are discussing political leaders, social movements, or cultural icons, the same question always remains. Are we learning history, or are we learning someone else's version of history? The brilliance of the Boondocks lies in its refusal to give us an easy answer. Instead, it encourages us to think critically, question assumptions and examine the motives behind every story we hear. Because once you understand the power of narrative, you begin to realize that controlling the story can sometimes be just as powerful as controlling the events themselves. And that realization may be the most important lesson of all. The story of Catcher Freeman reminds us that history is rarely as simple as we want it to be. Heroes can be exaggerated, villains can be invented, and sometimes the truth exists somewhere in between. What makes the Boondocks so powerful is that it doesn't tell us what to think. Instead, it challenges us to question the stories we inherit, the narratives we repeat, and the voices we trust. Because every generation retells history in its own way. The real challenge is separating fact from myth. If you enjoyed this breakdown, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Which version of Catcher Freeman do you believe comes closest to the truth? And if you enjoy exploring hidden meanings, forgotten history, and the deeper messages behind influential stories, be sure to subscribe and join us for future deep dives. Until next time, remember, always question the storyteller, not just the story.